Grab a brew, listen up, and get back to you. This is Things I Wish I'd Known podcast.
Hello, you awesome beings. Before we hop into today's episode, I really want to share something with you. If you've been listening to this podcast for a while, you will know I don't self-promote my services on here. But this week we are celebrating a huge milestone. It is Happy Habits Club's third birthday. I can't believe we've been together for 3 years in the community. And I wanted to share with you guys a little offer that I've put together to celebrate our birthday. So I'm hoping you're going to bear with me for the next couple of minutes just before we jump into today's episode and enjoy hearing about some of the people in the club and the benefits that they've received from it to see whether it's right for you too. So Happy Habits Club is a female-only membership for people that are interested in self-development, healing, spirituality. And I want to share with you a story from one of my members. I've changed her name to keep her I can never say that word, anonymity. So we're going to call her Olivia for the purpose of this. But I set up Happy Habits Club because when I was struggling with depression, anxiety, when I had my PTSD, my life felt completely out of control. I really struggled with so many different things, and there was so much information out there that I felt really overwhelmed and I didn't know what to follow. I was trying all these different self-help courses and was spending loads of money and time, and a lot of it, to be honest, wasn't particularly useful. Some of it I found a little bit culty, dare I say, and I wanted to create a space that was down to earth, fun, that where people could feel supported, where you could get the best quality information. You didn't have to go and search for it. And Happy Habits Club was born. I also wanted a space where you weren't going to feel overwhelmed. And that's why it's Happy Habits Club, one habit at a time. Let's just do it slowly, guys. Let's not rush ourselves into oblivion. So let me share with you Olivia's story, because before she joined the club, she had doubts and she was worried that it wasn't going to work for her. And she was really struggling in her work life and her personal life. She spent a lot of time, as did I when I was experiencing burnout, worrying about what her colleagues thought of her at work, whether she was actually any good at her job, whether she deserved to be there. And she dreamed of getting promoted to the next level in her career, but she really didn't have the confidence to even apply for the promotion. And deep down, she feared, I think, that she was not good enough, that she wasn't going to be able to do it. Outside of work, she found herself constantly in uncomfortable social situations. She would end up going to things she didn't want to go to, like hen do's, events, parties, and spend loads of money, even though she didn't even want to be there. And she found herself consistently playing this role of people pleaser and peacekeeper between friends that maybe didn't get on so well. And she was exhausted trying to be everything to everyone and feeling really disconnected from herself. Now, in just a few months, Olivia went from being stressed out, anxious, and on the brink of burnout to actually getting that promotion that she wanted at work. And I can't tell you how friggin' excited we were in the club. We do a thing called Wishes, Whinges, Wins every week, and people can share about their life. And when she shared her win, that not only did she get the promotion, but she also won this award for being the most improved person on her team, we all cheered her. We were so friggin' excited for her because we knew that that was what she wanted to do. And she also freed up her bank balance and her time because she improved her boundaries, not only with work, but with her friends too. And she booked her first ever solo retreat trip, which she had been dreaming about for years. So we were super happy for her. And it was all because she decided to join the Happy Habits Club. So this is what Olivia had to say about the club. Rachael and the people in the Happy Habits Club support me if I've had a bad or challenging day. It's nice to know that once a week we can all get together. I've been through such a transformational journey the last few years, and it was through the help of the club. So if you think it's not possible for you, getting rid of stress and anxiety, getting a handle on your life is totally doable. It really is. And you don't need to spend all your money on crazy self-help courses with complicated practices. You don't need hundreds of hours of therapy. You don't need this huge well-being to-do list. You don't need to be getting up at 5 a.m. I mean, unless you really want to, but that's not really my vibe. So you can be supported every step of the way in your healing journey through the club. And at the moment, because it is our birthday, I'm giving you 33% off for the next 3 months. So what you're going to get if you sign up is live events, regular live events where we meet and we do things like gong baths, we do meditation classes, we do mindful movement, we teach about the nervous system, about the mind, about limiting beliefs, we do some manifestation stuff. There's also all the replays, discounts to in-person retreats, and obviously the access to the Happy Habits Hub. Now, the hub is accessible via an app, but also on your phone, on your laptop, and it's like a Netflix of well-being. There's hundreds of workshops teaching you everything you need to know, from hormonal health, nutrition, all the way through to mindset stuff, meditation. There's mini courses in there, guided meditations, yoga nidras, everything you can ever dream of, that's going to help you to build your confidence and build inner peace as well. And I know it can be scary, right? I've been there, and there's a million reasons why now might not be the right time for you. But I want you to ask yourself the question, if you're not going to start today, when are you going to start? Because if you start today, your future self is going to thank you in a few months' time. So if you're struggling to get a handle on your stress and anxiety, if your mind and emotions are playing absolute havoc with your life, then take this opportunity to change. Come and join us. Let us support you. Let us teach you what we know and get the third birthday deal. It's 33% off for the next 3 months. So it's just over £20 a month. And I can't wait to meet you in the club. Come and join us. I'm so excited. You can also get 33% off the first 3 months of working with me one-to-one, but that's only available to the first 2 people that sign up, because I can't afford to give it to everyone. Sorry. So yeah, come join us. And I hope you enjoy today's episode of the podcast. There's a link below to get the offer. And if not, just enjoy today's episode. Thanks so much for being here. Much love. Hello and welcome to Things I Wish I'd Known, the podcast where we create positive change through conversation with your host, Rachael Welford. And today I'm really excited because I'm talking with Anne-Marie Zanzal, and she's a purposeful empowerment coach, but she works and has an incredible story working with people who are coming out. She works a lot in the queer communities, and she's worked in hospices and all kinds of things. So her life story is going to be incredible. And I know she's going to have some insane nuggets of wisdom that are going to help all of you, especially if you've got people in your family or friends who are maybe queer or part of the LGBTQIA community, or if you yourself are thinking about coming out or have recently come out. This is going to be the episode for you. So thank you so much for being here, Anne-Marie. It's really lovely to meet you.
It's lovely to meet you as well, Rachael. And thank you so much for having me.
I would love to know, because you've literally got this quite insane story, right? So you've a graduate from Yale, which is a huge thing in itself. You've been an ordained minister, a bereavement counsellor, and now you work as a business coach and helping people come out. And I love what you said as well in your bio about being a spiritual wanderer and then later in life lesbian.
Yeah.
It's like, I want that. That's such a great spiritual wanderer. So I might adopt that for myself. So how did you get into doing what you're doing now?
Well, it was when, I've always been a caretaker professionally. I worked as a chaplain for years. Before that, I worked for Girl Scouts as adult development and training. So I've always been in the helping fields. And so when I came out later in life at 50, I really had a really hard time. And so finding resources, finding people to help, finding community was really extremely challenging and difficult. So It was the third time I had tried to come out. And so I Googled late in life lesbian. Thank God for Google. And I found a Facebook group. And that Facebook group changed my life because women in that group were talking about things that I had only thought about in my head. And of course, like we talked about, and before we started recording, I thought I was the only one. And we're never the only one. And so when I found that community, that's what changed my life. And so then after a couple of years, I decided to create my own community.
Yeah, I think community is so important as well.
Mm-hmm.
I know in my experience with my mental health, that was super important to me, and why I have a club, Happy Habits Club. And, I think when you've had that feeling of community and that feeling of, oh my God, I'm not the only one.
Yes,
I'm not
absolutely.
the only one. All this stuff going on in my head, I'm not the only one. It just feels so refreshing to be around people who understand, and you don't feel like such an alien.
Well, yeah. And also too, in communities like that, oftentimes there's a mixture of people, from people just starting out to people that are 3, 4, 5, 6 years down the road.
Yeah.
And so for me, it was really helpful to have the experienced voices of people who were further ahead of me on this journey. And so the very sage advice they gave when I had a freak out and stuff like that, I'm so grateful for them. And they're all anonymous. I don't remember who it was or who said what, but they really helped me like sort of shift the paradigm in which I look at the world.
Oh, I love that. Shift the paradigm of how I look at the world. That's beautiful. So let's, in fact, using that, let's look at, so what was your paradigm like before you came out, and what was the change?
So I grew up in a very conservatively religious household. About 80% of people who come out later in life tend to grow up in some sort of conservative religious household, either from, it doesn't really matter which faith tradition, or if they haven't, their parents did. So those values that their parents had, even though they don't practice a faith tradition anymore, often, come into like how they're raised. And so I was raised in a pretty traditional Catholic home. My mother, sex was bad, so like when my mother fully expected me to, and my mother was older too. So she was an older generation. She didn't have me until she was 40. And so the expectations for me was that I was going to wait until I was married. And so when I didn't, because, it was the 1980s and I was 18, 19, I felt it wasn't that great. And I felt a lot of tremendous guilt, but I just chalked it up to the guilt I had of being raised in a very conservative religious environment. And so my expectations as a woman, like many women have, was to get married and to have children. Now, fully wanting children, I always did want kids. And so I did exactly that. I got married and I had children. There was some stuff before all that. And I was somebody who was like one of those people that sort of knew that I might not be straight, but I didn't have the language around it. And also I didn't have any community. It was also late 1980s. And for those of us who grew up then or who were of age then, it was terrifying with the AIDS epidemic.
Yeah.
And, not only queer sex was terrifying, but straight sex was terrifying, because you could die. And so that really colored, I think, a lot of my younger years. And so I just sort of put it away. And like a lot of women, I was raising 3 children. I have 4, but I was raising 3 children and they were all under 5. And I didn't think about my sexuality or about myself for years and years and years. And so it was in 2006, I read an article in Oprah Winfrey magazine, which talked about the fluidity of women's sexuality. And it was a lot of women the story was about women who were with women now after they had been married to men.
Yeah.
And I had such a joyous reaction because I all of a sudden realized that even though I had started down the straight path, I didn't have to stay on it forever. And in fact, I said to my oldest daughter at the time, who was 16, she's now 31, hey, if something ever happens to Dad and I, don't be surprised if I end up being with a woman. And she said, okay, Mom. And she has no recollection of that conversation whatsoever. And I tell that story all the time.
Yeah.
I don't know what you were talking about. I don't remember that. But that's because I raised my children as good little progressives. So it just was like, okay, whatever. So that was the beginning of a 10-year journey for me, where I would stick my toe out of the closet and put it back in, stick it out, put it back in, and sought help from therapists and got really horrible advice, was told it was a phase, asked, when I told the therapist, I think I might be gay. She said, have you ever slept with the woman? I said, no. And then we never talked about it again. And so I was not wise enough to know that that's not a marker.
Yeah, and look, that's a bit like saying to someone who's straight, like, have you ever had sex with a man? No. Well, how do you know you're straight then? Oh, yeah,
you're perfect,
right. Okay,
Rachel.
right.
That's exactly one of the examples I always use. And so what I realized, though, is that I was looking for validation from the professionals. And the only person who can name my sexuality and or gender identity is me.
Yeah,
nobody
absolutely.
else can. And so when I learned to claim my voice, that is when things started to change.
Yeah, it sounds like from what you're sharing, and I know for a lot of people, coming out is a really complex and almost ongoing process. I don't think it's I think a lot of people think it's this kind of, one thing that happens where you just blurt it out and go, I'm gay, or I'm queer, or I'm trans, or I'm whatever.
Yeah.
And then everyone goes, okay. And then life, just goes on. And it isn't. It's a much more, in my experience, I mean, I'm straight personally, but I've got friends, who are in the LGBTQ community. And so, it seems like this ongoing process where things change over time. And I was wondering if you, in your work, have seen like commonalities with people's experiences, or if everybody's experience is really different.
Well, everybody's, there's always similar threads to the story. So typically people who come out later in life, they fall into 3 categories. The first is the most common, which is somebody who falls in love with somebody.
Yeah.
Now, they fall in love with their best friend. They meet a woman at work. They may, just run into somebody and they fall in love. And for some of those people, it is like a complete shock to the system. And in our community, we call that a catalyst. So a catalyst is a person or an event that makes you realize you may not be as straight as you thought you were. And so some of the events, so there's the people that fall in love. Some of these people that have catalytic events are some people that get divorced, parents die, which is often a big factor for keeping people in the closet. The first time I started to explore that, and the second time it was one when my father died, one when my mother died. They may have cancer, their kids might be sick. I mean, there's all kinds of stuff. Whatever is like a really big shock to your system, and it makes you evaluate. And then there's people like me. I was somebody who was sort of vaguely aware of my queerness, and I would put it on a box in my shelf, and I would take it out once in a while, like, because I would become attracted to someone that would last 3 or 4 weeks. There was such a pattern to it. And then it'd be over with, because I'd go back into my shell. And it wasn't until I really acknowledged my queerness that's when things changed for me. So there's a pattern with that. There's also a pattern with women who get married. There's some people that never get married, but there are women that get married. And I always joke that we all married the same man. We tend to marry men that are good providers, are great dads, are seen as great dads, but are totally emotionally unavailable to us. And I think I've done a lot of thinking about that. And I believe it is because that we are not emotionally available to ourselves. So we partner with somebody that's not emotionally available. And then we're seeking emotional
safe.
It's a safety thing. And so those are typical patterns. And there's other ones as too. In the coming out process, there's some people that like what we call as femme in the LGBT community. And they typically have to come out all the time because they're not the stereotype of what we think is queer or gay.
Everyone's like, hey, you don't own dungarees.
Yeah, like, yeah. And so they just they don't look what we think of somebody who's
Typically.
gay. So they have to constantly come out.
Yeah.
School, work, kids, playgrounds. I mean, they do it all the time. So
Yeah.
coming out is not a one and done process. Like every time I go out in the South here in the United States, I live in Nashville, and like I mentioned my wife, and I do it as an act of rebellion,
Mhm.
and I'm coming out
Yeah.
because I mean, I could fall either way. If you saw me on the street, you would say, "Yeah, she's gay," or maybe she. I mean, I don't think it's like it screams it. Like if you met my wife, you'd be like, "Oh, she's gay."
I've got to be honest, my gaydar is awful.
Is it?
It's really bad. Like some of my gay friends are like, how did you not know they were gay? I'm like, I don't know if it's just that not that I don't care, but it doesn't, I feel like other people's sexuality is really none of my business. So I just
Absolutely.
kind of like, I don't know. I guess I don't really think about it. Like you say, unless somebody's, I don't know, exceedingly camp or exceedingly kind of flamboyant in some way that makes you go, oh, okay. I guess it doesn't really cross my mind too much because
Well,
it's
yeah,
none of my
because
business.
but also too, we also have stereotypes in our mind.
Yeah, true.
Of
Absolutely.
what somebody looks like if they're gay, if they look like they're trans or something like that, or non-binary.
Absolutely.
We have stereotypes. So if that person doesn't fit that stereotype, we don't think they're queer.
Yeah, absolutely. Something that we mentioned off recording as well was about community and culture. And something that you shared was that you came from quite a conservative background and quite a religious background. And I think that for a lot of people as well, they might have questions around that, like the listeners, in terms of it's not always, I guess, safe maybe for some people to come out, depending on where they're born, depending on the culture that they're brought up in, depending on the communities that they surround themselves with. And sometimes, coming out can really be met with a lot of like resistance or even violence in some cases, or negative reactions, in many different ways. Are there any tools or things that you teach or share that can maybe help people if they're struggling with those kinds of experiences where maybe they're up against their culture or their community or their church and they want to come out, but maybe they don't know how to broach that, or they're a bit scared of what might happen afterwards?
So I like to think about it as letting in. I use the term coming out just because everybody knows it.
Everybody use it.
Yeah, but letting in is where we take back the power.
Mm-hmm.
We are not coming out to get approval from a society that is what we call in the queer world compulsory heterosexuality. We are letting people into our most private worlds that we may not think were straight. And so if you take back the power, that is a really important piece. So there are places that it's not safe to come out in.
Mm-hmm.
And so if it is like physically, like Ghana, for example, if it is physically not safe for you to come out, then please don't do it, because you're more valuable to the world alive than you are not here. One of the things I think is really important is to find community.
Mm.
So when you are queer and you live in a very conservative world, you are not going to most likely find support in the beginning. Family often doesn't understand that. And what I like to remind people is that when we are telling mom or dad, brother or sister, husband or wife, or people that we deeply care about, sometimes they have absolutely no idea. And so we are sharing a part of ourselves. We are letting them into a part of themselves that may take them a little while to sort of get used to the idea. And so what I tell people is that people's first reaction is not their only reaction. So that is about family. Also too, I tell people that you need to find community. So there's a lot of queer communities online. There's lots of Facebook groups. There's other places as well. Reddit has a lot, Discord, all of those platforms have queer communities. So if you do not have one in your neck of the woods and you're in a rural place in England or a rural place in the United States and it's hard to access that, then you need to go online. That's what changed it for me. There is also queer community locally a lot of times. You just have to look for it. It's like Rachel said, like you sort of have blinders on to it until you open your eyes. So an LGBTQ business, like a business association, a community center, going to those and finding other people like you is super, super important. And also too, not being afraid to sharing parts of yourself with people that you know will most likely give you a positive response, because everybody deserves a full embrace. So a full embrace for me is so there's a half embrace. So you go and you tell your mom and dad you're gay, or your husband or your wife, and they say, or friends, and they say, oh, wow, thanks for telling me. How is X? How is your kids? How is your dad? That's a half embrace. A full embrace is when somebody says to you, oh my God, Rachel, thank you so much for telling me. I'm so proud you told me. Oh, I'm so happy for you. You finally found out who you are. This is amazing news. And that's a full embrace. And once you give somebody a full embrace, and this is for the allies too, you will never, ever be satisfied with a half embrace, and you'll sort of roll your eyes when you get one.
Yeah. I remember one of my friends came out to me at my other friend's wedding, and she hadn't told anybody. And she told me, and I was like, oh my God, it's exciting. Like, I'm so happy for
That's a full embrace.
And she was like, oh my God, don't tell anyone. I was like, I'm not going to tell anyone. It's your business. It's nothing. But I was like, I'm really happy that you felt you could tell me. And she's like, I just knew you'd be excited. She was like, I knew that I just wanted to test the water. And I was like, oh, and I felt, as a friend, I felt really grateful that she thought that she could share that with me. Do you know what I mean?
Well, that's a wonderful advice.
Felt like a really
an honor
thing, that something that can be so difficult, that can be, that you're probably really fearful. And I guess the only thing that I've had that's similar, because, with my sexuality, I kind of fit into the cultural norm. But like with my anxiety and my depression, and when I would tell people that I had that, and people were so shocked, because I'm outwardly very good at masking and very good at kind of pretending everything's fine, even when underneath everything isn't okay at all. And I'll do all my kind of like suicidal feelings and whatever at home out the way of everybody. And so that kind of felt a bit like coming out sometimes, when you'd say,
I understand.
I've got this mental health thing. And then you'd be like, oh, are people going to look at me different? Are they going to judge me? Are they going to think there's something wrong with me? Are they going to, so I imagine, it's probably different, because there's lots of other things that are overlaid with it. But that, I guess, for me, trying to assimilate that experience, it kind of had a similar feeling.
I think when we let people into our inner worlds and our inner struggles and our inner joys, I mean, being queer is joyful. It is vulnerable. But it's also like what Brene Brown said is wholehearted living. I mean, we have to be vulnerable. We have to show we have to destigmatize mental illness. We have to destigmatize being queer. I mean, like, that's just like, to me now, my lens is such that, having lived a straight life for such a long time, and now I'm married to my wife, I see the difference in how I get treated. Like, someone who's been queer their entire life, they don't see the difference because they're used to it. But I see the difference. I feel the difference. And I want to say that, like, I just step back and be like, this is ridiculous. Like, you're going to treat me differently because who I share my life with. That like straight people out there listening to this, you need to take a step back. If you're like, oh, I can't be friends with anybody who's gay. Rachel's being such an example of how you should be a friend to the queer community, just by everything she said today. But you need to take a step back and say, why am I doing this? This is ridiculous. I shouldn't care who people spend their lives with. This is none of my business.
I just feel
it's just
like,
not. Yeah.
I don't understand how it elicits so much rage from people sometimes, because I'm like, how is it affecting you? Like literally, when that person goes home with their, 2 wives together or 2 husbands together, or maybe 3 in a throuple together, or, polyamorous relationships, whatever people are doing day to day, genuinely, how does that affect your, like, to me,
when I experience people that have real rage, so for example, like some of the politicians here in the United States against the community, I often feel they have those feelings themselves and they don't know what to do with them. So they turn them outward to the world.
Yeah,
and I just want to mention one thing Rachel mentioned when her friend came out to her. If you are a straight person and somebody comes out to you, this is not your story to share. And so what I love, Rachel said, she goes, I'm not going to tell anybody. This is your story, not mine. And that's what, when someone comes out to you, you really have to be thoughtful and don't go start sharing with your group of friends that, oh, Susie came out to me and she's gay now. This is Susie's story to share. It's not your story to share.
Yeah.
And a lot of times, like, and as somebody, I did that a couple of times when I was living my straight life. I think because I was excited for that person and I was also maybe jealous, and I have regret that I did that. That was not my story to share.
I think sometimes, like you say, though, that could come from a really good place where you're just excited and you're like, wow, they're like fully realizing
I know.
who they are. And then you kind of, you want to almost like celebrate with them. But then it might be that actually they weren't ready to tell everybody.
Yeah. And in the beginning, those things, especially if somebody's later in life, and later in life is self-defined. So my youngest people are 25 and my oldest people are over 70. In fact, years ago, I was on a show with the BBC because there was some article that got a lot of play of some guy who came out when he was like in his 60s. So it was a big news for the BBC at the time. And the thing is that, the youngest person is 25 while people are well over 70. And the thing is sometimes they're just telling a couple of people, like, they don't want the whole world to know yet. And it's just because it's a process. It's not because of shame or guilt. It's because it's a process of becoming comfortable with who you are now identifying as. And before you're ready to share it with the whole world, because sometimes you're just not ready yet, and that's okay. And sometimes you may tell a good friend, but you're not going to tell your mom and dad yet, and so you have to really like respect the person's story and also understand that this is a process, an absolute process. And I would say it takes a good 5 years.
Yeah. I would love to know, because you shared that there were some differences in how you were treated as, in your straight marriage to how you're treated now with your wife. What are some of those differences that you've noticed?
So this is where it gets hard, because I'm also an older woman. I'm in my 50s. And so I don't know if it's ageism or being queer, but so when my wife and I go to a restaurant together, and we always get seated in the back of the restaurant or by the bathroom. Never happened to me. I get pissed. I'm angry now. And so I'm like, I don't want to sit here. You need to move the table. And they do, because I'm pretty intimidating. I get angry. So those poor, they're like, oh, okay. They move. But my wife and I have been led through restaurants, empty restaurants, and seated at the very back table by the bathroom. In another instance, there's been tons of little ones, but one most recently is that we shop at the store to get clothes and we go together. And so she wasn't with me that time, but they know who I am. And so my oldest daughter was getting married. And, I started chatting with them about that. Now, if back in my straight days, they would have been so chatty with me. And so they would have just been different, and they were professional. They were not, it wasn't busy in the store or anything, but there was definitely a coldness that would not have existed if they didn't know my wife existed, or they would have been like, oh, your daughter's getting married. Tell me all about it, And so those are some of the things that we face. And also too, like little things around like car repairs, wedding venues when we got married, things like that would never have happened if I was marrying a man.
Yeah, it's really difficult, I think, as well, because like you said before about stereotypes, I think a lot of people have a very clear stereotype of what a gay man is or what a lesbian is. And when people maybe don't fit that stereotype, it can be a bit confusing. And I think it's really important for people to understand just how diverse the queer community is, and that, it consists of so many different people from so many different identities, orientations. Like it's a fluid experience, and it's fluid for a lot of people. And then there's so many layers to it in terms of, self-acceptance and self-discovery and being able to, the identity piece. Like even in therapy, when I work with people with EFT, and we kind of use this statement a lot in EFT, even though whatever the thing is, I love and accept myself anyway. And I think what I love about that statement, and why I think it's so powerful, is, even if you don't want to come out, even if you're struggling with all this stuff, you can still love and accept yourself anyway. Even if you're struggling with your mental health, you can still love and accept yourself anyway. And I think it can be really a tricky thing when, I can only imagine, but, imagine coming out in general is very, very tricky. And then also having
no
that
matter how
identity
old
piece,
you are, it is.
no matter how old you are, and then having that identity piece. And especially I imagine as you get older, because identity isn't just about you and how you feel about yourself, but it's also the identity that other people have created of you.
Yes.
And so if you're the wife and you're married to, I don't know, whatever your husband's name was, and you've got so many children, and then suddenly, it's for, or maybe not suddenly for you, but for other people, suddenly, oh, now she's marrying a woman, that changes your identity in their eyes as well. And so there's
absolutely
so many layers to it, isn't there?
Well, yeah. And try being a minister. We haven't even talked about that.
The religious layer. Because
like when I tell people, like I'm a reverend, I don't use it, but I'm a Reverend Anne-Marie Zanzal, and in my denomination, which is it's United Church of Christ, which is a very progressive Christian denomination here in the United States. It was a blip. Nobody cared. It was also because I wasn't serving a church at the time. I think it would have been more complicated if I was serving a church, but I was a chaplain. So I was, so it really didn't matter for them. So it was a literal blip. But in my home community in town, I served two different churches on two different sides of a hill. One was an evangelical church and one was the UCC. And when I got ordained, both churches came together to celebrate my ordination. And when I came out really soon after, the evangelical church was pretty horrified and distanced themselves from me. So that was a real loss because I really loved that community. I just didn't I'm just not evangelical. And I was also not I didn't like how they treated women or queer people in my straight life. So that's why I left that denomination. So that was really, really hard, so, but I love doing when someone's being a real jerk to me, I will pull out the reverend because I just want to mess with their heads. But I don't use it. I don't use it professionally at all.
I love that. What is one of the biggest learnings that you think you've had through your journey of coming out, and especially later in life?
I think the biggest learning, and I tell this to people all the time, is that to live a happy life, and it doesn't matter if you're gay or not, you have to learn to let go of the expectations of others. It is across the board. Because when we live our lives so we please others, the person we end up not pleasing often is ourselves. So that is the number one thing I learned. I often tell my community that I work with that you have to let go of other people's opinions, because if you're going to live as an out queer person in this world, you have to not care what other people think. And so leaving that behind, that was hard, really hard, because I'm a recovering people pleaser and a recovering codependent. So, and I'll always be in recovery for that. But it was really hard for me to let go of the expectations of others and also putting other people's needs before my own. And here I'm going to drop a bomb on you, even my children.
I love that.
Even my
interesting
kids.
one. It's an interesting one, isn't it?
Now, I'm sure there's straight people and queer people out there saying, oh my gosh. So this is what I mean by that, is that our children deserve happy parents. And there is a narrative in this society that we have to stay together no matter what for the sake of the children. And because I have English clients, I realize how hard it is to get divorced in England. It's a 5-year process. It's super hard to get divorced in England. And this is the thing, is that when our children see parents fighting, arguing, drug addiction, alcoholism, just being cruel to each other, what are we teaching our kids?
Even if they're just being cruel to themselves.
Yeah, like what are we teaching our kids? Because then what ends up happening is we create generations of children that perpetuate what we're doing already. And so when I say is that when you know in the deepest core of your being that you are unhappy, and you know this marriage isn't working out, and I'm going to just stick with marriage right now, and you just like, oh, I got to stage, I got to stick it out to the kids are, and all these things like that. When we don't put our own needs before others, sometimes we end up hurting them inadvertently. We're not doing it to hurt them on purpose, but if you are truly miserable in your marriage, you need to leave. You really do, because marriage was set up as an institution when it was an agricultural society. And so there are a lot of changes now. And also too, if you're unhappy in your marriage and you're like, oh, I can never get divorced because I can't afford it and all that. So let's see a solicitor, see a lawyer, like find out what your options are. So you really are making a decision based on real facts and not supposed facts.
Yeah. I guess things have changed quite a lot as well, not only around divorce, and how because again, that's another taboo really, isn't it? In a lot of communities to actually
divorce is absolutely.
But also within kind of coming out, do you think there's been a lot of positive change over the last sort of 20, 30 years when it comes
coming
to
out or divorce?
Both. I'm interested.
I think there has been positive change in coming out, especially with people that are younger. So 30% of Gen Zs identify as LGBTQIA+. I think we have given them, because we have had visibility in the queer community, like they've seen queer couples on TV shows, they've seen queer romances, they've just had such exposure to it. I think that for that, I think, yes, it has changed, but those kids still have a lot of resistance. Sometimes they have to put up with, people are really, and also too, there's like, I had a client recently, she's only 30. She came out to her family, her mother and father, they reacted incredibly poorly, really poorly. And the funny thing is that, it's okay if it was, when their friends' kids came out, they were okay with it. But when their daughter came out, they were really, really horrified with that. And also, too, this is someone who's getting divorced. She's divorcing her husband. And they're also horrified by that. So I think even divorce is still really stigmatized in a lot of communities. And if you're in the religious fundamentalist evangelical communities, you get kicked out of the church just for getting divorced.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah, so you're not coming out then, are you?
yeah. I mean, even, but I'm saying, even if you're a woman in an abusive marriage in those communities, fundamentalism, some of the like more conservative evangelicalisms, I mean, the thinking around that is that you stay and because that's where God has put you, and you need to serve your husband. And if you serve your husband and make him happy, then you won't feel these feelings. It is I've had some like super fundamentalist evangelical women on my podcast, and it like my mouth falls open in horror of the things that they've been taught, because it's still there too, Rachel. I mean, it's still there. It's not gone.
No, it's definitely not. You've been working with people in crisis for a really long time, right? Whether that's people that are starting to come out later in life, whether it's through your work in the hospice. I think it's interesting. There was a study done. I wish I'd had the exact quote, but it was people that worked in hospices, and it was like most people's regrets of how they lived when they were dying.
Yeah.
And it was something like, I think it was the top one, or it was definitely in the top 5, was exactly what you were sharing. I wish I'd been who I truly was, and I wish I hadn't tried to people please as much.
Yeah,
and you
I actually
wow.
If you follow me on my Facebook page, I just wrote that. I wrote
really?
It may not have been me. I mean, people write that stuff all the time.
Yeah.
But I just wrote that. And one of the things that from hospice is people don't regret the things they've done. They don't. They often because if they've done something harm or or bad, or sometimes they learn to make their peace with it, or they learn to forgive themselves, or they sort of put it in context and they realize why they made that decision at that time. People regret the things they haven't done. They so regret the things they haven't done. And so in my own personal experience, I do believe working with hospice is one of the reasons why I came out, is that I knew that my emotional, spiritual, physical, and intellectual needs were not going to be met by my husband. And in fact, when we were together, he would say things to me like that, is if you need that, then you need to be with a woman, because, and he couldn't give that to me. Plus he was emotionally unavailable too. But the thing is that I knew that I didn't want to end my life without at least exploring this. When I started this, I had no idea where I was going to end up. I thought maybe I was just going to explore this and then go back into my marriage. One of the common things that happen with people coming out later in life, there's a discussion with husbands and 3 things happen. They give them permission to go and explore, which I sort of roll my eyes at, because if they wanted to go explore with a man, they'd never get that permission. They're allowed to go and explore. They talk about open marriage. They talk about polyamory without really understanding what polyamory is. And also my apologies. They also talk about a threesome. And some people do some of those things or all of those things. So
I think it's important to stress as well that, I think from a straight perspective, it's very easy to look at being gay as just a sexual act.
Oh God, no.
And it's not. It's love, it's relationship. It's exactly the same as straight relationships. It's all those other elements that you have within a relationship. It's not necessarily just I'll stay married to a guy, but I'll just go and have sex with a woman a couple of times. It's like, well, if you're an actual lesbian, that's not really going to cut it, is it?
Actually, Rachel, like what I say to people, so there's people that are curious.
Yeah.
My wife calls women like that. There's straight women that will sleep with women because they're curious. And my wife calls them 68s. She's like, you do me and I'll owe you one. But in reality, even people when they're just coming out, they think it's just about sex. They think that, well, if I go sleep with some women or a man, then I'll figure it out. And what it is not, it's so not about sex. It is, like it is in the sense that, that's how your sexual needs get met.
Yeah.
But I, like when I came out, sex was a byproduct that, and I was curious and I wanted to explore that and all those things. And when I did, it was the right, I finally realized I was with the right person for my sexual orientation. But like my emotional needs get met by a woman. A man just can't do it just because how they're built. And there's nothing wrong with them. It's just how they're built. My wife is like, my intellectual needs get met by her. She's the news reader in the morning, so I'm working and she reads the news to me. And also too, we're very politically aligned. Yeah. We have very similar belief systems. Well, my ex-husband and I mean, my ex-husband thought Trump was entertaining and I was horrified. So, we were just not aligned that way. And not all men are like that, but in my particular case. So it is so not like, it's so not just about sex. It's just not.
I know that you've got lots of different things that you're wanting to explore now as well. So what's next for you?
So I've been working with my later in life community now for a while, and Rachael and I talked about this. When you're in the coaching world, sometimes you just get, or in the help caregiver world, you just like, you get bored, or it is like, it's the same thing over and over again. And I was telling her before the podcast, we started taping that, like when I was in hospice, a year or two before I left hospice, I was like, oh my God, I've heard this story before, or, oh my God, I can't sit with another family why their loved one dies. And I knew it was time to leave, but it took me a couple of years to do it. And also, interestingly, I felt really small and I felt like I had something more to give to the world. And I don't usually talk about that, but I'm like, I got to do something different. I just can't do this. And so the same thing has happened with my like later in life group. I don't feel small. I love them. I will continue to work with them. I do a group coaching program. And so my hours working is gone less and less, but I love my community. I'll never stop doing that. But I realized that in this 5 years that I've been becoming a coach, that I've gained some really valuable skills. Yeah. So if you're somebody who has a vision of a business you want to create online, I am your person, because I really help people I love working with queer people. I also love working with allies. If somebody like Rachael showed up, I'd be like, come on over. But this is the thing, is I work with people often in the beginning stages. They know what they want to do something, but they're just not quite sure. So I work with clarity, visibility, branding, and also valuing what you're worth. I find that women typically don't value what they're worth. And so I really wanted to, and even men do too. Yeah. So I really want to teach people to value what they're worth. And so it's sort of the next iteration of my coaching business. And I have learned so much this year that I have never learned before, because I hired a coach that's an expert in sales. So I'm learning about sales, things about sales that I've never learned, because I want to teach people like me, other professionals that have something to give, and are tired of doing what they're doing now, but they know they have another good 10 years of work within them. So that's what I'm doing. And it's exciting and it's working. It's also stressful because, as you know, whenever we make a big leap, that's when the universe throws all kinds of things at us. And so I'm making this leap from being, a 6-figure entrepreneur to being, I would like to be a 7-figure. And so this leap has been like one of them. It's been pretty painful. And I don't think if I hadn't come out, would I trust the process so much. I know the process works.
I can't claim this because it's actually a woman, Sushma, that I know, and she's a healer, and she talks about when birds fly between the thermals, and in between the thermals there's loads of turbulence, and it's kind of like, and then you get to the next thermal and you can cruise again. And I think that's, like when you say, the universe kind of chucks all that stuff, I think it's when you're sort of going to the next level. It's like,
every time, because we're in our comfort zones, and then we want to go to the next level, and the first thing outside our comfort zone is fear. So we have to sort of like work through the fear. Now, what I'm saying is that my coming out process, like, I laid in the fetal position for 6 months before I finally made a move. And so like I realized that fear is just a feeling, and that when I am afraid, I have to navigate through that fear, because on the other side, there will be great things. And so I know that from personal experience now. So whether you're gay or straight or starting a business, whatever you're doing, you just have to work through those levels, those vibrations, because they're there to teach us.
Absolutely. So I guess the last question is, what's one thing that you wish you'd known about coming out that you didn't know that you'd love to share?
I wish I had known it was okay to be gay. And that there was a community when I was young.
Oh, I felt that. Yeah. That's beautiful.
Well, because I didn't.
Yeah.
And I don't know why I'm crying.
Okay.
But I was just didn't know. And, it would have been nice to have found my people when I was in my 20s, because women my age typically came out in their 20s. They weren't teenagers because it was a different time. And, like it would have been lovely to raise my children with my wife.
Yeah.
It would have just been different. My ex-husband was a lovely father and everything like that. It just would have been different. And I would have been happier.
Oh, well, you managed it. And lots of people don't ever get to that point,
Yes. And I want to say that, so this story is about my coming out, but it doesn't matter. If you are not living your authentic life, no matter what it is, like you've always wanted to be an artist and you're stuck making widgets at the computer factory, you need to go through towards your truth, and it's scary and it's hard, but you need to go towards your truth, because that is the only thing, that authentic living is the only thing that will bring you true happiness.
Yeah.
And it's not like I run around with unicorns and big rainbows all the time. I mean, life is still hard, and
waving your rainbow flag down the road every day.
Like you can see me right now. I'm in my office, and but the thing is that like, it's not that everything's perfect by now by any stretch of the imagination, but my solidness, my core. Like when I have a bad day, like when I was married to my ex-husband, I spent most of the marriage thinking, should I leave? And like, I don't think that now. That just doesn't even come up for me.
It frees up the brain space. This is what I say to a lot of my clients that I work with. Often if they've got anxiety or they're super stressed about things, or even with the clients I work with that have got depression, a lot of the time, it's because things aren't right in your life somewhere, and changes need to happen. And that's a scary place to be in, like you say, when you're coming out of your comfort zone or whatever, or you think, how am I going to make the money if I make that change, or what would happen to this, or there's so many layers to it. But I agree, if you can somehow find the courage and the confidence to just follow that often very quiet voice that's just saying like, hey, start a podcast, Rachel.
I know.
Hey, do this. It's like, oh my God, there's so much freedom on the other side.
Well, and also too, a lot of the women I work with suffer from lifelong anxiety and depression. And when they come out, it often lessens and it's not as bad. And this is two anecdotal things, but I had one woman that had MS, and when she came out, it went into remission and then went away. And I had one woman who had alopecia. When you lose your hair, her hair grew back. So our bodies know.
Yep.
Our bodies know. Our bodies know when we're not living our truth. Damn them.
Oh, Anne-Marie, it's been such a pleasure having you here and having this conversation. I could literally talk. It's like, how long can we have this episode? I can talk to you for so long.
Well, can I tell you, Rachel? I want to tell you something, and I want your listeners to hear it. I have been interviewed by so many people And you have been the most amazing ally that I have met, because you get it. And like, this was so last minute, and the universe brought us together. But I have never heard an ally speak, like you said, all the right things.
Oh, thanks.
So I really, but regarding coming out and about being queer, for somebody who's straight, you did a great job. So I really appreciate that.
I try to educate myself where I can on things that maybe don't affect me, you know. And you're not always going to get it right. And I think this sometimes with this podcast, I think, oh my God, you know, by the time I get to like episode 300, probably episode 1 and 2 and 3 and whatever, I'll be thinking, God, what was I saying?
I know you get better and better at this as you go along. Like, and like, it's funny because the things I would have like, I know how to cut people off now. Redirect. I'm like, sometimes, you know, so you just have, you know, like,
learn
that's
as you
okay.
go.
Yeah.
Well, there's probably loads of people listening to this who are thinking, oh my God, how do I get in touch with Anne-Marie? So if there's people listening and they're thinking they want to either get in contact with you about maybe a business idea that they've got and they want some help with that, or if they want to maybe join your Later in Life community, what's the best way for people to get in contact with you?
The best way to get in touch with me, I'm on Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, all those. But the best way is go to my website. It's my name, AnneMarieZanzal.com. That's ANNEMARIEZANZAL. And find me there. There's loads of ways to get in touch with me there.
And I will put all the links below as always. Thank you so much for being here. And as always, thank you to you guys, the listeners, because without you, this wouldn't exist. If you can, please do like, subscribe, share on whatever platform you're listening or watching this on, because it really does help us reach more people and hopefully change more people's lives. Thanks again for listening, and I will see you again very soon. Much love.
We hope you've enjoyed listening as much as Rachael enjoys making this podcast. Why not share it with a friend in need of some heartwarming inspiration? And if you really love it, drop us a review on Apple Podcasts, as it really helps us reach and inspire more people. Thanks for listening.